Dan, I think many people know you. I definitely do. My name is Guy Katz, a business professor here in Munich, Germany, and more someone who thinks about anti-Semitism. What about yourself in this regard?
So I'm a professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University. And yes, I am also thinking more and more about conflicts, identity, and anti-Semitism. For me, this journey started with COVID, kind of seeing the discussions online, the extent to which people were willing to lie, and then developed to a much higher extent in the recent history.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We also see parallels and some of the same people who attack us online actually connected to COVID. But maybe we can get to that later. So as always, I will try to make this short and sweet, and I just prepared 5 questions for you about the, let's call it the psychology of anti-Semitism, if I may. And maybe let's start with this online world that we're all in, but we're not really in it because it is online. It seems to me, to us very often, that many voices, whether from the media or influencers, prefer this, and I'm using simple language on purpose, the pro-Palestinian narrative, even when that's super misleading, simplistic, and sometimes, yes, also extreme. And there's many less people on, again, our side. How would you explain that?
And the question is not how would I explain it, but how would I explain it in a short time.
That's
So
true.
look, I think that a statement toward the Palestinian cause is a much simpler statement.
Mhm.
A statement toward the Israeli direction is a more complex statement. And we have media that favors the simple over the complex. And we have media that prefers more likes to less likes. And the simple versus complex is actually important because it's not just we prefer, X character to 3X characters. It's about the fact that when we have something simple, it can tap identity. And when we have something complex, it cannot tap identity in the same way. So we have simple versus less simple, identity versus not identity. And then we have likes. And the realization is that there are few Jewish people and there are many more Muslim people. And if you said, let me do something to get likes, go to the place that there are more people. And the algorithms are like that. And by the way, it's kind of interesting. In democracy, we have rules to protect minorities
Mhm.
because we understand that the voices of minority cannot be in numbers. So democracy inherently is protecting minorities. Online life doesn't. Online life is just about majority. So you do have this very non-democratic approach where the majority could easily trample the rights of the minority.
Hmm. Is it also about David and Goliath, to use a more biblical example, the side of the weak?
There
Okay.
are other things as well. There are other things as well, right? But I think the side of the weak versus the strong is part of the story about simple versus complex.
Mhm. Much easier to do so, and many more likes, obviously.
Yeah, and there is complexity on both sides.
Of
Sorry
course.
about this fly. There is complexity on both sides, but the Palestinian side can, in my view, be expressed without complexity, and the Israeli side is much harder to express without complexity.
Also
Like
because
which
we,
complexity you can gloss over, it's much easier on the Palestinian side.
Mhm. Yeah, and as you said, it's we can get way deeper in it, but we wanted to stay short. So maybe moving from the online voice to no voice at all. I've been to demonstrations, I've seen people holding pictures that you I cannot stay silent in front of kidnapped babies, for example, on October 7th. What makes people stay silent, whether it's online or even in the real world, even when they may actually agree to what is being said, or disagree, by the way?
So in behavioral economics, we have this notion of loss aversion. And the idea is that we are much more attuned to bad things than to positive things. And you can think about this historically or from an evolutionary perspective. If something good happened to us in our evolutionary history, let's say we found a rabbit, we would get 2 or 3 more days of living.
Hmm.
If something bad happened to us, let's say a lion found us, game over. The payoff in our evolutionary history were very non-symmetrical between good things and bad things.
Correct.
Good things were just a little good, bad things were terrible.
Mhm.
So because of that, we're attuned to negative things. So when we have an opportunity to do something that could be a little bit positive, but could be negative, we start by thinking about the negative things. What will happen if somebody would see me? What will happen if somebody would comment? And so on. And we are very, very much influenced by that. By the way, young people even more so. The younger people are, the more they live online, the more they're used to what is called a surveillance society, the
Mhm.
more afraid they are. And of course, there's more to say about that, but the starting point is that we don't want to make mistakes.
So
And if,
to say nothing at all.
yeah,
Mhm. But that kind of is, well, that means that courage or courage in general is getting harder in this age of likes, online lives, outrage, cancellation, another term that
that's
we hear
right.
these days.
That's right. You know, Zimbardo, may he rest in peace, had this project called the Heroism Project. And he basically said that in this day and age, you want to give people small examples of how to say something. Let's say you see a bully. Let's say you're a kid in elementary school and you see a bully.
Mhm.
How do you master the behavioral approach and the courage to say something? And Zimbardo said you have to start with small things.
Mhm.
You know, if you want people for the first time in their life to say something courageous on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that's a tough one, right? We should start with some small things, but we should train people to be courageous, to say things, and to experience it. And then, of course, we need to reduce the flame, cancel culture, and so on as well.
Hmm. So the little thing could actually be a like or a small comment online as a first
Yeah.
step, before you do something big. What about yourself? I mean, you're like me, Israeli, you're Jewish, you're also intellectual, quite a public one, if I may say so. Have you had moment where you were scared, where maybe speaking out felt risky? I know I did, both online and in real life. Some of us are actually under close protection here in Germany, for example. I know in the United States too, which is horrible. How does it feel to you?
I've had some tough conversations, um, mostly online. You know, I got used to being very threatened during COVID, so um, but no, I didn't feel threatened physically. I did have some very, very tough discussions with people, um, you know, about what is going on. In particular, there was an Irish guy
Mhm.
that wanted me to come on his podcast,
Okay.
and he, you know, used me as a way to attack the current situation. And I reminded him that I volunteered at some point to show up at his wife's festival, and that this was, you know, 15 years ago, and that I wanted the Israeli ambassador to introduce me because I wanted to improve the relationship between Israelis and Irish, especially because of BDS. BDS is very, very strong, and maybe the headquarter, I think, is even in Ireland. And he agreed, and they asked the Israeli ambassador, and he said, okay. And then they got lots of negative public reaction from BDS, and they caved. And I reminded him that I wasn't canceled personally, but he changed his plan because of pressure to BDS on something that had nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I said, you gave this a hand 15 years ago. So it wasn't it wasn't like, this is somebody I like and I care about.
Mhm.
And nevertheless, I had to tell him, you made a mistake. you you gave a hand. You want to criticize the Israeli government, perfectly fine. You want to have a discussion, perfectly fine. Canceling something because of somebody's origin was inappropriate then and is inappropriate now. And I
Mhm.
think that if I knew then what I know now, I would have told him you can't cancel it. This is not an option. You don't do that. You don't cancel somebody's appearance because of their heritage. And I said, if you want to add a discussion about this, you want to add a debate about the real things,
Mhm.
right? But the cancellation out of is inappropriate. I don't think I felt that I had the power at that point to make this. It was their conference and so on. But I think now I would have behaved differently. I think we've allowed too much cancel culture to flourish in regards to this. I would never cancel somebody Palestinian because he's Palestinian, and I would fight to get them to voice their perspective, and I would also um, dramatically disagree with people who are trying to cancel Israelis or Jewish
Mm.
people.
Yeah, and as academics, I think it's a part of our job, to be honest. It's the only way to go. Do you have any tips? This one comes spontaneously as a psychologist to people who are canceled, who are scared, who were threatened in one setting or other? Is it?
So there are many different things that you said. I think that the fear of being canceled is probably for the vast majority of people is worse than actually being canceled.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that by not saying things because we're afraid of being canceled, we're making the problem worse. So if you say, where will we be 10 years from now? If we don't have a voice now, 10 years from now, it will be much worse. So kind of collectively, people who choose not to say anything are kicking the can down the road. We're not solving any problem. It will become worse. And I think people need to practice. They need to practice the way to say things. Um, so let's say um, let's say we have a discussion now. Let's say I'm invited to a university,
Mhm.
and let's say that I'm going to talk about social science, behavioral economics, and let's say that some students are protesting and they don't want me to talk,
Mhm.
and they interfere. What are my options? Fighting back doesn't help. We know that. Debating doesn't help because we don't hear each other, we don't listen to each other, and so on. I would personally just invite them to talk to me later in a private session. I would say, look, your friends are here to listen to this. You're welcome to stay. You're welcome to leave. And I'm very happy to meet with you separately afterward and hear what you have to say if you'll hear what I have to say. We academics are in a very special group. We are the most international group there is.
Mhm.
In many ways, I think that the BDS approach to cancel academics is the most unproductive approach there is. Academics are the most international. We work across borders. We work with people on whatever the other side means. Um, when after October 7th, lots of authors decided they don't want their books to be published in Hebrew. And I did a video with my books in Arabic. I'm
Okay.
very proud that 4 of my books were translated to Arabic, more were translated to Persian. And I basically said, look, these are my books in Arabic. When they were first published, um, the Arabic country that published them, from there things went to other countries, were officially an enemy of my state. And I said, my statement was not to say don't publish it. I went to them and I say, can I write a letter from me, Dan, to the Arabic reader? They said no, by the way, they didn't want that. But I said, look, we authors or we academics, we have a stage that doesn't listen to the regular boundaries of states. We have the privilege and the opportunity and the obligation to bring about more reasonable approaches. Like,
Mm.
why would you want to attack academics? It's the one group that has the biggest chance to bring improvement. Why would you want authors to boycott a country where, in fact, what you want is the people who you disagree with. You want the most to listen to what you say. That's what you want. Like, everybody wants people to listen. We all want people who don't agree with us to listen. And you're writing something. This is it. You have a chance. Here's a country where most people don't want to listen to you, and you have a chance to talk to them. It's just boggles the mind. But by the way, it also tells you that the efforts are not about promoting peace.
Hmm.
The efforts are about creating a separation and so on. University students are relatively at an age that is relatively easy to influence,
Right.
which explain why BDS focuses on students. But it's the wrong domain to try and influence.
Mhm. Completely agreed. And like you say, academics maybe is the place to start, which leads me to the final question. You're an expert in many things like nudging. So how can we nudge not just the academics, but society towards these kind of, honest, courageous conversations, or just simply to speak up? You mentioned it shortly by starting maybe with small things. Is there one concrete thing that you would recommend that we can all do somehow to make this world better, whether we're academics or not?
So I'll give you 2 examples. The first one is something called intellectual humility.
Mhm.
And intellectual humility is about not being 100% sure in anything. As academics, we're kind of trained to do that.
Right.
Our students come to us and they say, oh, my experiment didn't work as I expected. And we say, wonderful. Now we really don't know what's happening. And we'll spend the next 3 years trying to understand it. And let's enjoy the uncertainty. But certainty is the enemy of progress. If I think that I'm 100% correct and you're 100% wrong, I have no reason to listen, and there's not going to be a chance of progress. But if I'm even 98% sure I'm right, and I think there's 2% chance that you're right, that 98% chance I think I'm correct and 2% chance that you're correct, it creates an openness. And if I'm 90% sure and 10%, it's even better.
Mhm.
So I think that intellectual humility is something that we should teach in schools, we should train ourselves. We should start by convincing ourselves that we don't know that much. We don't know as much as we think. So that's my first suggestion.
Mhm.
Train yourself and the people around you in intellectual humility.
Sure.
Another way that is related is called the illusion of explanatory depth. And one way I demonstrated it is with a flush toilet. So I said to people, do you understand how a flush toilet works? They said, yes. On a scale from 0 to 10, almost perfectly. Okay, I said, luckily for you, I have all the pieces of a perfectly new flush toilet here. Please assemble it. People tried, nobody could succeed. And after they failed, I asked them again, so how well do you understand flush toilet? And people said, not so much. Now, if you think about it, the general discussion is one in which we fight. I say my opinion, you say your opinion, and so on, and we fight. The illusion of explanatory depth says we have overconfidence in our knowledge. We have knowledge and we have confidence. Confidence is extra high, knowledge is not that high. If we want to have a conversation, we need to first puncture people's confidence. And the way to puncture people's confidence is not to attack, but to say, what do you mean?
Mhm.
So, for example, with the previous election in the US, not this one, the one before, we took a group of people who said that Trump won the election. And we said, okay, you say Trump won the election. We're not going to argue with you. Help us understand how exactly would elections be stolen? What are the mechanisms that are protected? How will it work out? And people basically said, after they tried to explain it, they said, you know what, I'm not really sure. Now,
Mhm.
did they move from being Trump supporters to not Trump supporter? No. But did they reduce the confidence that the election was stolen? Absolutely yes. And I think the same thing is true about lots of things. People have we all have very simplistic ideas about almost everything in life. And a really important way forward is to ask questions. So how exactly does it work?
So when somebody says to us, Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, is not cancel it, but ask them, what do you mean? Or how did you get to that conclusion, for example?
Israel is making is having a genocide in Gaza. That's a statement. But
Right.
I would say, so what should Israel do?
Mhm.
Should
Mhm.
Israel do? And I had lots of discussions like this, and people say, okay, Israel should withdraw immediately from Gaza and stop the war. And I say, okay, great. Let's say you could be granted that. And then what? And usually people say, oh, it's over. I said, no, no, no. Hamas, do you let Hamas rule Gaza?
Mhm.
And they say, yes. I said, only 4 weeks ago, there were riots against Hamas, and they killed all the leaders of those riots, of the protesters, not riots, there were protests against Hamas. Do you allow Hamas to stay in power? And people would say, yes, until the next election. And then I would say, would you let them arm again? Would you allow them to have nuclear weapons? And people say no. And then I said, what happened if they arm again? And whatever happened on October 7th happens again on May 17th. What would you want the Israeli government to do then?
Mhm.
And in all my discussions with people, I had lots of those. People say, I don't know. I don't know, because the reality is that the a conflict between a state and a terrorist organization, we don't have a rule book for that.
No.
We have a rule book for how one army should fight with another army. A terrorist organization is kind of out of the rule book of what is the right thing to do. And it is so complex. It is so complex. And look, I think everybody is wrong. I think in a war, everybody loses. I'm not particularly interested in having a discussion of who is more wrong. I am interested in discussion of how do we move society and humanity forward. Um, but and basically what I try to get people to realize is that what we need to do is to stop with the simplistic statements
Mhm.
and to think together about what we can contribute to a step forward. For example, Europeans who are boycotting Israeli academics, the moment you get them to think about it, they realize that they are boycotting the group of people who are the most likely to bring about positive change, the change that they want. If you're pro peace and you want to boycott Ben Gvir, go for it.
Of course.
But if you're pro peace and you're boycotting um, sociologists because that's your field, you're doing the absolutely unproductive thing. So anyway, I don't argue with people. So I say, for example, so how would boycotting? I talked to sociologists recently. That's why I'm saying this.
Okay.
So I say, how would boycotting your academic fellow sociologist in Israel University help? Like, give me the mechanism. They would do what now? They would say, oh, now we're seeing the wrong of our ways. No, no, these are people who are pro-peace anyway. How does it help? Less students will study sociology. Um, is that helpful for you? Is that what you want? And so basically, you kind of the moment you start with a mechanistic view of how are your actions going to help with your cause, um, it becomes much more complex, and people reduce their confidence and sometimes see that their actions are not exactly consistent with what they want to promote.
Hmm. So be humble in what you say and what you think you know. And
And puncture confidence. Don't attack knowledge. Start with confidence.
That's great. Is there any last thing, kind of last message, last words before we end this truly inspiring call?
I think the world is easiest for people who are extreme.
Hmm.
And people who are extreme have a much easier time promoting their ideas and getting people to follow action. It's a very sad state of the world, but this is where we are. We've created a world that is heaven, as close as heaven as possible, to extremists, and very, very tough to people who have a more nuanced, complex view of the world. I don't know exactly I don't know how we fixed it. There's lots of things we need to do, but we need to understand that this is where we are. We need to understand that if you have an extremist and you have somebody with a more nuanced, complex view of the world, the extremists have a unbelievable advantage, and it's part of the fact that the human mind is not consistent with the information technology we have outside right now. And we can't change the human mind. I think we need to change the information technology around us, but that's a big discussion for another day.
That's amazing. Thank you very, very much. Toda rabah.
Of course, my pleasure.